Hi, I'm Rory Greener from XR Today, bringing you the latest in news and conversation from the extended reality space. I want to thank everyone from the panel today for joining and tuning in to the April 2024 edition of the XR News Show. And to discuss some hot industry topics and some new trending and emerging technology is Amy Peck, the CEO of Endeavour XR, Jay Latter, the speaker and founder at Fusionists, Letitia Bouchard, the managing director of Virtual Switzerland, Kevin O'Donovan, co-chair of the VR/AR Industrial Metaverse and Digital Twin Committee, and Jennifer Wolf, the executive officer of Learning, Technology and Standards Committee at the IEEE. And in this month's show, we're going to be taking a look at the business value of spatial data, perhaps looking beyond headsets, looking at broader end devices, and then the implications that comes with it. Recently, the World Economic Forum released a report highlighting the emerging industrial metaverse. Amy, you're involved in that report. It'd be great to learn a little bit more about the industrial metaverse. The metaverse itself is a term that's perhaps a little bit muddied by marketing over past years. What is the industrial metaverse? Could you perhaps break that down for us and what the report highlighted?
Well, I think it moves us past the hype of the metaverse. We're all very grateful that Meta has invested so much in this, but now we're really looking at what are the practical elements. And I think moving past even what we call it in terms of metaverse, it doesn't necessarily need to be called metaverse, but really it is this always on persistent layer of data that is synchronized to the real world, has location awareness, and will allow us to make inferences about how all of our processes are performing, and then especially using AI on the back end, start to be able to optimize that performance.
Fantastic, brilliant. And just to continue on from that, if anyone wants to jump in really to discuss the report or discuss perhaps where the industrial metaverse and what that is, and then how that equally brings value to end users involved in it. The industrial metaverse isn't just a single product, it's an ecosystem of products. Kevin, you're obviously quite involved in that in your own work. How do you feel about this new report?
So it's good. What I like about it as well is it gives throughout the report some concrete examples of how people are deriving value from this, right? Because when we talk about, if you like, the industrial metaverse, we'll take all of the data that's in existing silos in different companies, different industries, and we'll merge it all together and we get one version of the truth, what do you call it? The super digital twin or the uber digital, whatever you want to call it. So it sounds like the art of the possible is like, okay, wow, imagine the possibilities. But then people go, well, how would I use it in my company? So the more things you can see where people are using it in the supply chain, where they're getting value out of it in, we're designing stuff in a digital twin, doing simulations before we build anything, whether that's a ship, a building, a power line, or whatever. Just the time to market, the business benefit out of that. So the more we can see kind of little examples from different industries, the more people will move away from the hype and kind of go, okay, that resonates in my world. That's a problem I have. Need to check this out. So I think it's a good step forward.
It's an important step forward.
It's important. I think,
yes.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Jay.
It's important because this emancipation from the meta-Zooks, meta-kindergarten, simply leaving this walled garden and really to showcase the people or the interested parties that it's an ecosystem, that they need to think in this kind of, okay, where is my piece that fits into this overall puzzle, this multimodality and interoperability. This is really very, very important. This was somehow a little bit silent due to this overhype. Oh, they will spend 10 billions every year. What kind of nonsense? The second thing that is important to understand, that due to this ecosystemic approach, it's not just one technology. It's not just about XR. Now with AI, generative AI, wow, the next hype, with data approaches and so on, with how do we secure our connection, can we trust our data? So all of these considerations, by the way, I wrote a paper about the 5 technological layers for data-dominated businesses just for you to know. So here it's really very important that with this report, with this initiative at this World Economic Forum, that really this thing right now becomes a reliable model where we really can move forward and create the right use cases.
We're going to have to share a link to it, but I will say that Kevin, you're spot on that the report starts to demystify the technology, but I want to even zoom out and talk about just the approach that the World Economic Forum takes. You have internal personnel who are experts in the field, and they're leading the research. But if you go to the report on the last, there's several pages of all of the contributors. You've got companies that are competitors. You've got companies that are, global concerns. Accenture is one of the, lead teams. The team that are involved in this paper are brilliant. I've talked to most of them, and they're so passionate about the technology. But then there are other of the, the big four that are actually on the overall working groups. And, just the idea that all of these people are coming together from different perspectives and really trying to distill this down. We need to do more of this, and we need to think about how we do this with all of the technologies that are kind of, coming at us with full force.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked a bit about it, but I'm also pleased to see some of the work of my great colleagues in the industrial space making it into the report. I think everyone's been working for quite some time, certainly limited by infrastructure concerns and things like that on a global scale. But as those things are starting to resolve, we're seeing more and more application of the industrial metaverse. It was great for me, obviously, to see such an emphasis around workforce enablement throughout the report. Regardless of the industry, that pops out, as we've seen before, as a primary use case where people are able to use the technology. And I think it's interesting because I'm starting to see an intersection between kind of the IoT sensors and things that we typically think about in digital twins with the people side of the equation. That hasn't always happened, but I'm starting to see it happen, whereby we're starting to understand, particularly from a workforce enablement perspective, that if we do have sensors and ability to kind of look at things that are trending out of limits from an operational process perspective, that we also now have the ability in real time to provide the right intervention to a human being so that they can take that data and make the right decisions that humans need to make to normalize that operational process. So it's exciting to me to see all of these pieces start to come together. And certainly in that report, it starts to kind of weave all of those threads together, which I think does nothing but good for the industry and for people starting to understand how do we use all this tech together in a way that, doesn't create chaos, but instead is interoperable. And to, the human beings that are part of these experiences feels like one seamless, operation or experience rather than all these disconnected pieces of tech.
If I may, we have Hannover Messe coming up in 2 weeks' time, biggest industrial show in Europe. To Amy's point, whether we end up calling this the industrial metaverse, if that's the word, in 5 or 10 years' time, the convergence of all the technologies is not slowing down. It's not going away. The access to skilled workers, I hear a lot about, AI and all this stuff's going to take away our jobs. Yet in every industry, especially in energy, it's like, we just can't get skilled workers. We need to free up time from these people. So I'm convinced that this is, whatever we call it, this is where we're going. The bus has left. So it's great to see reports like this coming out, making it a bit more concrete, right?
Letitia, I don't know if you want to jump in there.
Well, I just, it's funny because I just reviewed this paper here. So this is the creating certainty for the metaverse. So right on your point, Kevin, it's about making sure there is legal, tax, and regulation in the metaverse. And obviously this has to become one of the bases of this metaverse. If we want it to advance, it's true that we will need a better definition. And I wanted to ask you what you think of the World Economic Forum's definition of the metaverse because they accept 2D and 3D. And we just had this great conversation with these guys who wrote this paper. And I was saying, okay, this is crypto and ICT. Obviously, in Switzerland, people think of money and banks. And so they go crypto. Metaverse for them is crypto. It's not XR or immersive technologies or AI for now. So I was bringing my ICT viewpoint, but for them, it's still crypto. And this needs, obviously, compliance and regulation. But only if we speak of a certain type of platform. So for me, 2D or 3D platforms are not quite the same. What's your take on that? Because for me, sometimes I'm a bit lost in translation between what they talk about at the World Economic Forum and what we talk about in the immersive community.
I think the definition, I think we're getting stuck on trying to define these things, and I think that works itself out. All of this is going to be whatever consumers call it, right? Once the technology is really ubiquitous, I would argue that the metaverse is includes AR, but then there are purists who say no, the metaverse is a purely CG environment. So, and it doesn't really matter because it's not about being right or wrong. What we need to get right is the protection layers and the data protections and the proof of humanity, and proof of identity, and also there are some significant environmental concerns as we scale, because we talk about the cloud, but the cloud's not the cloud. The cloud is just racks of servers in weird places in buildings that are very, very hot. And are going to get hotter as we build more processing power, and we're demanding more data. And where's all that going to go? And Jennifer, you're on IEEE and doing, frankly, some of the thankless work of trying to build the standards for all this. And I think that's where the focus should be. If people are going to educate themselves about the technology, first of all, they have to understand the difference between crypto and even blockchain, right? Because as soon as I say blockchain, and I ask this of audiences of 100 to 2,000 people, and I say, what's the first thing that comes to your mind when I say the word blockchain? And they will all in unison say either crypto or Bitcoin. And then I have the next slide that as they're saying it pops up. And so, I think we need to educate the public a little bit better. But we also, until the consumers figure out what all of this technology is, we need to be busying ourselves with the hard and thankless work of figuring out interoperability and then the privacy controls and protections.
It's a data connectivity layer that has the capability to display this data also in 3D. So rather, beside of this interoperability and protection regulation, we need to build as well standards so that this can be a seamless experience. If you watch this metaverse thing, see via your headset, via a laptop 2D screen, if you own a holographic display, maybe in 50 years a brain implant, it does not matter. It does not matter, whatever.
5 years. I wanted to add to that, the territory is very, for me, the territory more than the e-citizen is very key, because I don't want to take on the laws of the territories where some of those server racks are being, are being stacked up. I don't want to be suddenly a Kazakh or, I like my Swiss citizenship. And that's a matter of, international
Maybe
law.
the metaverse needs to be an own legal entity. Because if people, if companies, if whomever wants to do something bad, hides behind, oh, my server is in Romania, my server is in Moscow, whatever. Everything that goes digital, that goes into the internet, we would have needed this already in the internet time. Because right now, everyone is just, sorry to say, bullshitting about domestic, about nationwide regulation, which implies somehow some kind of national chauvinism. It's nothing else than a dick contest. And here, if we would simply say, okay, all of this is one legal entity, it's a different, and they are in relation, in cooperation with a physical entity, so that your data approach is in this virtual entity, just one thing.
But if I may, folks, and you know, there are so many definitions out there, and everyone's got theirs. And depending on what side of the industry you're coming on, it's got to be crypto, it's got to be AR, VR, God knows what are. The personal opinion, I think there's a very big difference between what we call the consumer metaverse and industrial metaverse. Industrial metaverse is pretty much whatever that industry, that company wants to do and protect their IP and connect with their partners and there's all sorts of standards and security and. But if I may, what we're trying to do is that we have all of this data in industry today, whatever industry, in different silos, in different formats. Some of them are two-dimensional data, an SAP system, you know, not that sexy to look at. We've got LiDAR scans, we've got 3D CAD CAM models, we got BIM, we got all of this cool stuff. What we're now trying to do is kind of go, can we munge all this together somehow so that I have one version of the truth? It is a 3D representation and I can spin it around, whatever. How I consume the content in some ways is kind of irrelevant. Whether I'm looking at it on my 2D screen on my phone and I can spin the model around, or I'm on a 2D monitor, 3D monitor, hologram, VR, AR, whatever. I really couldn't care less. But we're all looking at the same version of the truth. And back to Jennifer's Jennifer's comment earlier. However I'm consuming it, I'm collaborating with people in different places, and we're all looking at the same data.
Right.
At the same time, and we can actually make decisions and. Now, huge amount of technology and stuff to get done. But again, that's where this convergence of all, look at what's going on with NVIDIA and Intel and the comms and the headsets and the goggles and the whatever. And in fairness, with the whole data residency and whatever, we do, you know, we're getting better around the world with laws as to what can be where, health records and whatever. Most companies are not going to just stick their data into the ether because it's commercial viability and intellectual property, trademarks, trade secrets, you name it. So that the industrial metaverse is easier than the metaverse, in my opinion. There's less moving pieces, but I still think we're just starting to build it.
Yes.
But there's going to be a lot of different definitions. But again, it's back to people having, here's how we're using it, here's how we're extracting value, here's the challenges we had, here's what we got to fix. And this report just goes through lots and lots of examples. So I think it's a good thing.
Yeah.
Right. And just pulling on that thread that a lot of you have spoken about standards. I agree with you, Kevin, that, you know, kind of the modality or the representation layer, whether it's augmented reality or virtual reality or what have you, isn't always as relevant. One of the things that we need is common agreements around metadata and how we're coding those objects so that we can put them in the right people's hands in the right way. Amy, I'm a big fan of AR. I think AR is part of the metaverse. It's critical as we start to look at how we layer different experiences on top of the real world for people, once again, from a workforce enablement perspective. And so that metadata piece is incredibly important. From an IEEE LTSC perspective, where we look at the learning technology standards, we have some standards around learning object metadata, now called learning resource metadata. But even in that realm, you know, we have to expand beyond that and collaborate with others, because, you know, when does an object in the metaverse start and stop being a learning object? It's hard to kind of say that, you know, where that line starts and stops. And so it is really important from a standards perspective that we're all kind of speaking the same language. I think on top of the regulation pieces that we've heard about from Jay and Letitia, I think it's also important that we don't lose sight of the transparency as well. Now, to Kevin's point, I've been in organizations where this has been the case. There are certain objects or data that are confidential that I'm not going to share outside of my own organization. But that said, it's also really important that people understand the structures around how we're capturing this data, and that there is transparency around what's being stored and how it's being stored, because it's hard to regulate things when there's no common currency with regards to the ways in which we're collecting data on the objects and then collecting data on the ways in which we're enabling people in the workforce, particularly from an industrial metaverse standpoint. And I think that's where the modality does make a bit of a difference. When I think about our experience standard, the XAPI, it does take into account what human behaviors can be tracked based upon the type of modality that someone's using. And so some of that becomes a little bit more relevant. But at the end of the day, I'm putting you in an environmental or operational context as a human being. And then what I'm presenting to you is triggered by the environment itself or by a specific need or request that you have. And so it's really important that we have a common way of looking at the objects and looking at how people act upon the objects in this space, for us to really be able to provide that seamless experience we've been talking about. And transparency, I think, is key. We have to understand what data is being collected, where it's being collected, as everyone else has said, and agree upon the standards or format in which we're collecting that data. What's the syntax, right?
You mentioned something too, which I think is also, if we start to zoom out, it makes me laugh sometimes when people are talking about, like, we're a designated smart city. And I'm like, are you though? Because, really a smart city requires that it's, a level 4, level 5, fully connected digital twin. And where we're all getting stuck is that, all of the companies that have physical space in that environment, for it to really be a true smart city, we need to figure out where that line of demarcation is like, what is data that you can comfortably share?
Right.
And then is the government going to manage that? Who's going to manage that data? But it's important that everyone is contributing to this, kind of city scale, digital twin, smart city construct in order to enable those services for the consumers that we want, right? To make their experience of the city, to make their experience of moving through the city more seamless, to allow for autonomous vehicles, because the vehicles are looking for anomalies, but there has to be a, AR cloud or digital twin or whatever you want to call it for it to ping against, to know that this structure is supposed to be here. That stop sign, was like this yesterday, but now it's like this because Jay Latta drove his Porsche into it. Oh, sorry. Did I say that out loud? And no, but we have to be a little less precious about IP and start to kind of loosen that up in the same way that we've accepted open source, right? It's the same thing, right? We just need to get there. We need to convince everybody to play nicely.
Letitia, I think, do you want to close us off on this topic before we move on to the next as well?
Yeah, that's very interesting because it opens this kind of forum, the next one, the Pandora box. But I wanted to speak about the last mile, and that last mile is what is really difficult to assess and to regulate. But also, this is the USP industrial metaverses have had. And this is where we could actually do the running tests in industrial metaverses. Although in Europe this week, it's quite, we have a dreary time with metaverses because Glue didn't succeed at taking off. And that was really, really a big disappointment on my part because I really liked them. And but I guess the overheads were way too much for them to carry. And also Vroom, I don't know if you've known that Vroom has also reduced its corporate or its vision, because now it's only you can do things bespoke, but it's not an open platform anymore, at least not for now.
Just to follow from that point,
Yeah.
sorry, I think it is interesting because in this last year period, going back to March of last year, you've had reductions in Horizon workrooms, you've had reductions in Mozilla hubs, that's closed down, Altspace closed down, and the staff went over to Microsoft Mesh, and then obviously Glue today is closing operations potentially too. I don't know if that's maybe a trend of the past year, perhaps, where we're placing our value on these industrial metaverse technologies, because obviously it's an ecosystem of technologies, not just MR, AR, VR, but then also things like Gen AI that we've also discussed. I do wonder if it's a perhaps change in tide to where businesses are putting their values, perhaps, especially now that times have changed so much.
I have
Please.
perhaps the beginning of a conversation here. Is it because it was outsourced and it wasn't too, it wasn't controlled enough, or it was too expensive to be controlled if you wanted to have it as your own? And so people perhaps they go toward a verticalization of their own operational and industrial metaverse in-house. I'm not sure. This is really. I want your advice.
No. But I think you're asking the right question. But I think the other issue that we've seen. In fact, I'm in Orlando and I've talked to Full Sail about running a program around something similar, which is, why companies are not leveraging collaboration tools. And what one of the hypotheses that we've come up with is that unless you're really prescriptive about what you are doing in those environments, people don't know what to do with them. So if you just say, look, here's a really cool, persistent environment, you can put your sticky notes up, you can have your virtual whiteboard, and then if you come back the next day, it's all going to be there. But people are like, well, why is this better than Zoom? Or we already have, Miro or Monday.com or, any myriad of these sort of collaboration, these 2D collaboration tools, which for the moment kind of work. They also have a little bit of a steep learning curve. So once people use them, they continue to use them. And it just goes back to the 2D, 3D question that you were asking, Letitia, is that we've trained ourselves to parse data, to work with data on 2D screens.
Right.
And we don't even know how to deal with 3D objects, digital objects in a 3D space, which is why you see companies going, here's your virtual desktop. And it's just 2D screens in a 3D environment, because there's this learning curve about what do we do with all this data? How do we interact with it? How do we call it up? Right? So we're going to be the input devices effectively, like gaze, voice, gesture.
Yes.
Eventually the implant, so it'll be thinking and it pops up. But a lot of that is going to be around. Like Apple, for example, with the Apple Vision Pro, they're very, very good at baking organic interactions into their SDKs. But it's going to be 2 or 3 generations of the Apple Vision Pro before we really get, real consumers, not the early adopters who are in there and understand what are the things that they're doing when they're presented with a 3D object in their field of view, and how are they going to interact with it? And that's when we're going to start to standardize that, because it'll get baked into the SDK. That'll give developers some guardrails to be able to, build on top of that and make it a seamless experience for consumers. But I think we're several generations of headsets away from that.
It's even worse. Sorry for Jennifer. It's even worse because with this spatial approach, our employers, the industry and so on, does not accept the individual approach. They simply give you something and tell you how you have to use it. So everyone is more or less looking for some kind of vendor lock-in. Now you use my sticky notes and you can exchange this data. If I want to have these sticky notes or look onto this data from a different perspective, if I want to work in a sphere and not in a virtual object, if I want to be a plant or whatever, this is simply not part of this vision. So you are completely right, several generations, because even this mindset needs to adopt onto this. Why several generations? Because it's the fucking money. I mean, imagine, for example, how the internet would look like if it would have been under the pressure of venture capital, being successful, making craploads of money. It would be dead immediately, and we would still use books and so on. So the metaverse, the spatial compute and so on is still dominated by how can I make craploads of money as fast as possible, secure my market share, and don't give a damn about the others.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting when we look at collaboration, which is kind of what we started to talk about, in more of a 3D type of environment. One of the things, in addition to, I agree with you, Amy, that there's the hardware needs to progress and everything else. However, I have to say something about standards again. So I have a meeting later today, interestingly, with a major global player and a piece of tech, because one of the things that they've asked for is, can we come together and define what we're actually looking for in human experience in this virtual collaboration space and measure it, which is beautiful. I mean, that's where I get excited about XAPI and the opportunities there. But I mean, I think that people are starting to ask the question, right? How are these 3D collaboration tools better, different than the 2D collaboration tools that we use today? In order to answer that question, regardless of its, the advance of the hardware, we have to ask ourselves, what is it that we're expecting to see in terms of human behavior in the collaborative environment? And then we actually have to put it upon ourselves to track and measure that, to look at the efficacy of the particular type of interaction you're providing. I think the good news is we have the data standards to be able to do that now. And I'm encouraged, that people are starting to ask the question about how we actually start to measure those things, and not only be able to say, these are the behaviors that people are performing in a collaborative environment, which, by the way, are all those what people have previously referred to as soft skills and all of those pieces. But I would submit are the skills that actually make us human, that are actually even more important in an industrial metaverse of the future in terms of the skills that human beings need to have. It gives us the ability to actually give people the ability to say, I have demonstrated this skill, and there's evidence of my ability to negotiate, of my ability to actively listen, of my ability to, as you were saying, target my audience, or, my body language or my eye contact, or all of those kinds of things in a way in which actually benefits people, makes them more visible for the skill sets they have, and give them opportunities in the future from a career perspective. So, I think we're getting there, but it is a different mindset around why do we collaborate in the first place, and what should we measure and track around that experience?
If I may, so I've used Glue. I know some of the guys there. I wish them well. They had some great environments, and the SWAT room, and this is my personal opinion. I think they are too early, and many more are, back to us humans haven't figured out. Like we're all cool kids, right? We use this stuff. We're in the 0.0001% of the population, yes. Right? They're to be quite honest, they're not going to make money out of us, right? We're too whatever, and we it'll take us time to get there for all of us to go, how do I use this? Jennifer, to your point, and it's standards, and it's how we collaborate better in companies. We have less workers. How do we actually collaborate in a better way?
Yeah.
But I'll make a stupid comment, right? During COVID, we all started using Teams and Zoom and whatever. What percentage of people use that productively today? 90% of the people know 2 functions of the 500 that are in there. And then we wonder why, metaverse has failed again. It's like, no, we still don't even know how to use some of the stuff we think is normal.
Yeah, we haven't defined the intent, right? We haven't defined our intent. Until we define our intent, we can't measure or track it.
And it has to fit into our workflow, whatever that workflow is. Yeah. If it's I have to go here and go there, I don't want to know. Anyway,
Why?
Rory, next question. Oh, sorry.
No, sorry,
Letitia, once more.
Jennifer.
Move on.
Why is the intent, linked to measurement and tracking?
Oh, great question. So I think the reason that we want to link the intent to something that can be measured or tracked is so that we can, one, show the efficacy of the type of experience, right? And actually make determinations. Which environments is this appropriate for, and which ones, to Kevin's point, does it seem cool, but it's not necessarily bringing much value? Because I think until we can define that ROI, it's going to be difficult for people to kind of jump in and start to utilize these tools. It's on us to be able to communicate to them which intents are appropriate. But as I said, the other really exciting part of it from my perspective is if we have the ability to actually give people the opportunity to demonstrate skills in a way in which they wouldn't be able to in their normal everyday environment, then we give them the ability to actually say, hey, I'm really good at this. And, I might need to be considered for opportunities where people aren't seeing me or connecting me to those opportunities based upon the skills that they demonstrate. So I think it's both ways, right? We have to define intent so we can measure the efficacy, which helps us from an ROI perspective. But then we also need to define intent and how people are doing things so that we can elevate people and give them the opportunity, should they choose, because that's important, right? To share with others the skills that they've demonstrated in those environments.
And I think as well, just to sort of wrap this up a little bit, this discussion here, I think it's really talking about the translation of the journey of a user going from 2D computing to 3D, warts and all from an end user perspective, or a human using it, to the companies, to the vendors, etc. Then also, as you say, understanding the fact that we don't fully understand 2D computing fully yet, and most people even less so, and that equally amounts to something in that translation from 2D to 3D data. Another side of that was standardization, which Jennifer, you gave us some great insight there as well. But another side within all of that is security and privacy concerns. Going from 2D to 3D, we're experiencing, or will experience, a far wider breadth of security and privacy concerns, especially from those immersive metaverse end users, those segments there. Letitia, from healthcare, bits like this as well, which I know you're experienced in. These are very sensitive sectors in terms of security and privacy. The consumer side is maybe is a big concern equally, but there's so much sensitive data coming out. Jay, I know you've had your ear on the ground really about a lot of new emerging privacy issues. It'll be great to hear your perspective about some new issues coming out in terms of 3D data usage. It's a brand new perspective in terms of computing, and that's a brand new perspective for people who perhaps, or individuals, groups, etc., that want to break those security and privacy considerations. What do you think, Jay?
So you are referring to this framework, or to the idea of an inception attack on a VR environment or immersive environment. This is indeed a very interesting idea. In small cases, it was already demonstrated. The thing is, if you can, like in the movie Inception, create an alternative, a parallel view, because your other people that you are surrounded in this virtual reality environment or augmented reality environment with, they don't see what you see. So it's far easier to trick you. So here, this is the one aspect here. The other aspect is to create an invisible layer where you can simply be spied on, where you can be recorded. The critical thing here, moving from 2D, from social media, towards 3D spatial data, is that we all know it. Metazoc is already able to predict your kind of interest, political interest, and so on, from what you like, how you comment, yada yada yada. Even your sexual preference can be predicted. With 3D data, it's also the interaction with others, which is something very, very dangerous. Letitia, you as a healthcare expert, I've been 2017 involved into a project, VR for psychotherapy. This is so dangerous. No, it's good, it's beneficial, but without proper safety regulation without the awareness of these inception hacks, for example, it would become a very, very scary thing where you can someone who is already somehow adjustable to any kind of manipulate them even more with the technology of deepfakes in avatars, where you can really, we six would be in a VR environment, we interact with each other, and you don't know who is influencing me until I freak out because it's not visible for you. So this is really something extremely scary, with some other right now cybersecurity issues like the latest hack on open source on Linux, when someone can start this infection several years before until you even realize it. So here we see a completely new quality of dangers of social manipulation, of manipulation in general. And with more spatial, we will need far more controllable content. We need reliable content, trustworthiness. We need even some kind of panic button. And we need a clear mindset. So even these secured environments can, with usage of something that I don't understand, and the technology is meanwhile very complex, we don't get everything what is going on. So if it's, let's say, some kind of China device where it's already part of the firmware, I don't know it. There are many China phones out there that are somehow corrupted. If it's a platform that is based on open source, I love open source, but meanwhile, the decision takers, the users, do not understand what they deal with. And this is really scary.
Yeah, I think it's even worse when you consider the level of biometric data that's going to be available in these devices, the eye tracking. We're going to have smart fabrics. We already have our wearables. It's going to be very easy to triangulate our response and actually our subconscious response to any kind of data or input in objects, products, services, and be able to slowly kind of manipulate us on a level that we don't even understand ourselves, right?
Exactly,
some of our behaviors, some of our triggers. And so, when we go back to the privacy piece, in a perfect world, we have self-sovereign identity, self-sovereign, that's tied to our self-sovereign database.
Correct.
Right? But then how do we store that data? Who is the company that we are, subscribing to store that data and that we're entrusting, right? Does it work if it's a Web3 construct and then it's distributed? Well, but then, is it transparent? Is it really not hackable? All of these questions are, you just ask one question and then there's 50 more behind it, right? And so we have to start thinking about how scary this is. I mean, you can buy an $80 device today and you can create a spoof network. Like I could literally just put up another network in this hotel where I am. It'll look just like the Marriott, right? And then people will log in and then I could take all of their data on an $80 device that anyone can buy on the web today. So we're going to have that for virtual environments.
And we are digging currently this grave deeper and deeper. What is the most important tool that we all, meanwhile, barely can live without? Tell me.
Smartphone.
Yeah, exactly. Johnny Ive and Altman are working on replacing the smartphone. Now latest hot news. So Gen AI with some kind of device. So it would mean having some kind of smartphone as a service, tablet as a service, whatever. It's just a dumb terminal and the data, the processing happens somewhere else. Of course, it's nice, it's cool, but with this new kind of attacks, with this inception, where you are being faked on your device It's not that you need now someone to knock on your door, to have the right uniform, to pretend being a police officer and people see it and so on and so on, really to make one of these high efficient frauds. Now, you need a call center in India. That's it. And the quality of these frauds, when you are getting via generative AI any kind of fake calls that you cannot differentiate anymore. With the beginning of the Ukrainian war, Russian-Ukrainian war, there were several fake calls towards ministers, towards parliaments, towards and so on. The latest thing, for example, was this kind of fraud call for Trump, something like this, pretending he being him and collecting money, yada yada. So it becomes easier and easier. What we had in the end of 90s, beginning of 2000s, the script kiddies that had no clue what they are doing. It was just a script out of a folder. This is right now a new quality with high-end attacks, this inception, this folding your own reality, put it into a different dimension. This is real, and I have no idea how to solve this.
But I mean, I think this is relevant to what we've talked about earlier in this conversation around the presentation layer somewhat being irrelevant, right? Yes, it is deception. We are in an environment where people are susceptible to being duped, to giving away data, to all of those kinds of things. But the presentation layer can change, right? I mean, we have this problem now. It's interesting, even from a corporate perspective, we've been working for years to teach people about basic digital literacy around what is phishing. How do you recognize phishing? How do you report phishing? This is the same thing. It's just a different presentation layer, right? And so, I mean, I think in addition to all the things that we've talked about in terms of the hardware, the software, tech and standards and all those things, it also comes down to things we've talked about in our previous conversation last month around human behavior, right? And educating people in a digital literacy type of way in a new age around, okay, now we've learned to recognize digital threats in our email or in our 2D world. What does it look like in the 3D world? How do we become more educated as consumers, as as colleagues in a business setting, in terms of what this could look like, where the dangers and risks are, how to mitigate those risks, and how to report them if we feel like we're in an environment that isn't safe.
Don't click the link. Just don't click the link.
Right. Just don't do it.
What I see as well is a huge dumbification, not just of the consumers, as well of the workforce. People are getting tired. And they see on TikTok and on Instagram, so it's the truth. And this is the scary thing. So security by design, it needs to come as first. Simply, and as well some kind of change in the mindset. When I'm creating something, my first question should be, would I be okay with it if my baby is being used against me? So some kind of, not an ethics, some kind of cleansing my own mindset and not being tempted to use it for garbage. And if it's just out of laziness.
So if I may, I think we've seen this movie before, right, throughout history. Anytime we start moving to the next technology, whatever, and you're sick of me saying, human nature hasn't changed.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is our human nature to innovate new things for good and for bad hasn't changed. The ability of the bad guys to figure out ways to do bad things hasn't changed, and our ability to be stupid certainly hasn't changed.
We are just more being stupid. More people that can be stupid.
Maybe we're getting better at it. but cut a long story short, the paper you sent over, Jay, fascinating read, right? Like the art of the possible. And can it be done? It can. But if I may, if I want to create trick you into the fact that you think you're inside the control room of a nuclear power plant, that's going to take some serious skills, and it's going to take a bucket load of money, right? And it is far cheaper today to do a phishing attack or a phone call attack because we're still stupid. So I absolutely agree. But no, that doesn't mean that, sure, look, we'll be fine, whatever. There has to be guardrails, and it's like social media. 15 years ago, this social media thing, God, this is great. We're all in the same town hall and we can all talk to each other. I did not, or I'm not sure who did, kind of thought about how we were all going to be manipulated by this, whether it was by some grand plan or it just happened. We just don't know we don't know what we don't know. And as we head into this world, if we do get to a far more immersive, collaborative world, God, we're going to be manipulated in all sorts of ways. So
Kevin,
it is what it is.
you said in the previous topic that we had, one thing about the workers, about replacing with the Gen AI, because there are not enough workers, skilled workers, yada, yada, yada. Everyone is complaining about the lack of shortage of skilled workers. So of course it's a natural thing to add on more RPAs, CPAs, Gen AI, yada, yada, whatever. So this, let's say, dumb guy being in a virtual environment, remote, home office, whatever, running a nuclear power plant, because you will not need these skills. And because due to efficiencies, you see military people having Xbox controllers to fly a drone. Sure, of course, because it's efficient, but this efficiency without this kind of security level that you are really allowed to use it. I mean, a nuclear power plant that you can then run with a controller from an Xbox. Oopsie.
But Jay, if I may, thankfully, in things like running nuclear power plants, are the guys who fire the nuclear missiles, allegedly, there are fail-safes. There are human fail-safes. Right? So there are certain things that can't be done. You can build things in. I can't go off and turn off the grid tomorrow morning. Even if I wanted to, and I was running the grid in France, I can't. It just, there are checks and balances.
France is the easy thing.
But Jay, look, the art of the possible. We were talking earlier. We need to educate people. Absolutely. Are there dangers? Absolutely. Look at the last 20 years, what the chaos we've created for ourselves. Will this stuff create more? Absolutely. But we can't just go around and go, be afraid, be very afraid. Let's all crawl into a hole.
Completely agree. It's not to be afraid, to be scared of whatever. The thing is just, we need, when we are planning something, we have to think about this stuff.
I agree.
This is what we are being lazy, because our thinking goes around efficiency, which means profitability, and about profitability. So someone in automotive that I know, that I will not name, they would rather save right now €2.50 per vehicle, even if in 5 years it could save them €250. So right now they will not spend the money because of this pure greed, because of efficiency, because of this, sorry Jen, fucking ROI thinking. It's just ROI, OKRs, KPIs, the whole alphabet of horror. And our companies are being ruled by accountants and controllers, not by people that are thinking.
I think as well, it really goes to show within all of this, whether it be people trying to leverage the solution for positive ROI, or even if it's people trying to invade security and privacy guidelines, it really just shows off the value of spatial data to a very wide range of people that isn't just the clients at hand. And just to wrap us up a little bit, because we only have a little bit more time, Kevin, it'd be really great to hear a little bit more about your perspective on the current value of spatial data, that growing value. It's really, to go back to what we've talked about in a couple previous episodes, spatial data is going beyond headsets to robotics, to automotive, to just general simulation technology that can then be applied to, say, a headset or a virtual or a holographic monitor, for example. From your experience with some of the events you've been at, how have you seen that growing value of spatial data? And if anybody else got some closing points on that general sense of the growing value of spatial data, as I say, perhaps going into the end of the year, I think that's going to be a very different look, a very different perspective at the end of 2024 when we consider the value of simulation, digital twins, etc. Kevin, what do you think?
You could have a Netflix series on this. To be quite honest, it depends on how you define spatial data. And it's like, how do you define a digital twin? How do you define the metaverse? How do you define XR? Cut a long story short, people have been collecting data that gives some information about its geographic location, its relationship with other objects. We live in a 3D world, right? Everything is whatever. We have depth perception, whatever. We're seeing more and more data being collected from what we're going to build, how we build it, when we built it, how we run it. We need some of that spatial awareness, that context. So there's more and more of that. To Jennifer's point, there's my take on standards. We don't need more standards, we need less standards. So there's lots of standards out there on whatever. I think what people are doing is it's now going, we've done a LiDAR scan of something. We have a digital twin, right? Reality capture. We have spatial data from what we should have built, or what the builder told us he built. We've got all the IoT data saying what's whatever. We're now starting to munge that together. That's a spatial digital twin. And suddenly I can start making a lot more, hang on a second now I can start simulating things. What happens if I run the factory 20% faster? Will all the conveyor belts run at the same speed? Idiot stuff, right? But I can simulate everything. And I think the game changer is that we're starting to get the data together, and there's standards needed, and. But there's this ability that, hang on a second, I can look at data in a different way. I can run simulations. That's key. Whether I then look at that on a 2D screen, 3D screen, VR headset, AR, to be quite honest, that's a personal choice, right? Up to you. And some things will be better for training and some things won't. But if you look at all what's going on, everyone's going, well, we have all this data. Bringing it together as spatial data might be the way we can finally start munching it together. Now, the other thing I would just throw in there is that you didn't throw an AI at it. But it's not that you just stick it in, you create a big text file and send it off to ChatGPT. A large language model on real-time data, sensor data, is very different to a language model that we're whatever. And all these foundational models, and people are starting to play with them and whatever. That's what's driving the industrial metaverse. Because if I want trained workers, I'm not going to go to ChatGPT. Now, what I might do is, instead of me trying to figure out what screen to go to figure out the thing, I might just ask the machine, what's wrong with you? And it will conversationally come back because it's interpreted all the data.
Right.
That's where we're headed. But look, we could have a Netflix series on this one. Anyway.
Kevin, your point on simulation is very important, because right now there are already some incarnations of Omniverse that are being used to even predict. So we have right now, with this technology, with spatial data, with some tools, some kind of magic crystal ball where you can see into the future, not far in the future, but you can see when my supply chain is being interrupted, not just the obvious stuff, but this system can predict and pre-simulate for you how it might look in 7 hours, so that you can allocate people. You can simply change something. What you've said as well about what if I run the conveyor belt a little bit faster? It's not just this. When you are building, let's say, a new car, you can start simulating over all of your manufacturing facilities where would be the best place, where do I need to change the minimum to get the maximum out of it. So here, when you are planning a building it, so construction, selling it, running it, it's this real representation with the possibility of historical data and a prediction of future data. And with the Gen AI, come on, Gen AI is just the UX. It's a chatbot that has access to this data. So it's my interface to give me easy access to expert systems. I don't need to know what this button does. I simply ask the bot. So here come really two extremely interesting things together. You can do very bad things with it, but I hope that we have enough self-hygiene that we do the right things with it.
Yeah, but I think you're right. And I think on the heels of, NVIDIA's GDC, can we just talk about Jensen Huang as, the Taylor Swift of technology? Like that stadium, he comes out and it's like a dark stadium. I'm just waiting for everyone with their lighters. When he comes on stage. It really is kind of amazing.
And he kept everyone's attention for 2 hours.
He always does. And
that's incredible, right?
And it's,
anyway, sorry.
The way that they're constructing, the very aptly named Omniverse, and then showcasing how they're using it. They're choosing partners. I mean, they've been working with BMW for quite a while on the Factory of the Future. They've worked with Ericsson. I know you're smiling, Jay.
No, I'm not.
Ericsson for placing 5G towers to be able to simulate the signal strength. And then even their own, the robotics piece where they're actually, simulating and training the robots in Omniverse. Like it is incredible, but I think it's the right way to think about the cross-pollination of all these technologies and almost, having a container for them in this Omniverse construct to be able to feed, parse the data, but start to layer the data in ways where it is, contextual to that user at that moment in time for that purpose. And as we start to understand that better, we're also going to learn to, the simulation data that we need, we're going to get better at that as well, because we're going to start to understand how to collect the data in a way that allows us to project further and further into the future with these simulations. And then the real-time simulation on a single chip, which he actually talked about last year, and it somehow didn't, catch fire in the press. But if you look up, real-time rendered simulation and it's two cars racing, it's nuts, the capability. Right. And starting to combine this with real business practice and optimization, it's, buy NVIDIA still, even though it's gotten expensive.
What is being created here is not just a new reality, it's a new dimension. It's a technological dimension. So fourth dimension is time. We need to invent a new dimension for spatial.
Now, as a good ex-Intel guy, they had their conference the last 2 days. So there's not only one show in town.
Yeah, I mean, I think the great thing, and Amy was kind of getting at this too, around all of this is it gives people an idea of how everything could come together, right? Because for many, I would submit at this point, it's difficult to see into the future and see all the pieces come together. I think all of us that are in this conversation, tend to be the people that can make those connections in our mind. But for the general public and for industry even, I think the great thing about what NVIDIA is putting out there is it gives people the opportunity to see in a tangible way the ways in which some of these things can connect. And to your point, Kevin, what happens with that and how it stimulates the market and what other players come to the table, I think is really interesting and great, because it gives, kind of a visual for people that need that to take the next step around the maturity of the space.
Couldn't agree more. I think one of the key partners there that really pushed that idea of the technology understanding of that technology rather, is their connection with the Vision Pro that was announced during the presentation as well. Another company who you could argue is doing the exact same thing, and that marriage of technology or marriage of XR firms may look very interesting in the future. But I'm going to have to stop the conversation there. We've had a lot of your time and I appreciate your time very much. Thank you all so much for joining, and thank you to Letitia as well for joining us from that very busy event. Brilliant. Great chat. That's it from myself. Our viewers, you can get more XR news by following the XR Today's news channel and our socials. I'm Rory Greener from XR Today. Thanks so much for watching, and thank you so much for a wonderful discussion, guys.